Oh, fancy transition there. So, welcome everyone to Twitch. This is my first time doing this. This is a little bit of an experiment that, first of all, I'm hoping this just straight up works from a tech perspective, that you can see me and hear me all right. But this is very much an experiment. I've never really used Twitch before, but a lot of us on NativeScript, the progress teams, have been considering using Twitch more. So if you're here, welcome. Thanks for joining me. If you're finding any of this interesting, be sure to let us know in the comments, in the chat. So this is something that we can consider doing more of. If you like this format, if there's other ideas or suggestions you have, let us know. My agenda today, what I wanted to talk about is a little bit about NativeScript in Angular code sharing. So I figured I'd start by going over some of the basics for people that are completely new to the concept. And then I've got an app over here that I'm going to explain a little bit. I've got to do a little bit of work on this. It's a code sharing app that has a reasonable amount of complexity. So we're going to tour around that, and there's a couple features I wanted to add as well. So I figure we'll just poke around that, and if you have any questions or such as we go through that, make sure to let me know. So if you have any questions, like I said, about code sharing, drop it in. Let me bring over my browser. So that anyone that is new to this and just sort of wants to know where to start, if you go to the NativeScript documentation, which is on docs.nativescript.org, and there is a code sharing link that's been there for several months now that talks a little bit about what we do with code sharing with NativeScript. And the real idea, there's some of this looks a little more complex than what it is, but the real idea is that since you build NativeScript apps with JavaScript, and you can build other things with JavaScript like web apps and whatnot, that it makes a lot of sense to share code between the approaches. And we spent some time working with the Angular team to essentially make it possible to do all of this from a single repo. And this documentation is where to go through if you're looking to get started. It's built on top of the Angular CLI and what's called NativeScript schematics, which builds on top of the Angular CLI. And so that's sort of the background. Like I said, I just wanted to sort of preface all of this just so you have a little bit of background information for what I'm talking about at all here. But I've got an actual app. I think sometimes it helps to learn by seeing a real application in mind. So this is an app that I've built called Go Checklists. And if I run this, you'll get a sense of what this actually looks like and does. So you might know I'm a fan of the Pokemon franchise. I'm specifically a really big fan of Pokemon Go. And it's very much a collecting game. And there's not a whole lot of things built into the game itself to sort of track your progress on certain things. So I built a little app that does just that. And so I'll drag over my browser here so you can see this. And this is really, like I said, it's just a glorified checklist app. So you see lists of Pokemon. You can check them off. You can see your progress. There's a couple different things within the game that you might want to track. So those appear here. I have a little way that you can sort these things as well, depending on how you sort of want to do this and track this. And before you laugh at this too much, because this is a really simple concept, this app for a while was on the Google Play Store, and it did have over 50,000 installs within a few months. So there's a big market for this sort of silly, stupid little thing. I had to pull it from the Play Store for a while, which I can get into in a minute. But it's a pretty popular little utility app. And I like maintaining this because just background of being DevRel, sometimes you can get, it's nice to have like a concrete, real app to build. I spent a lot of my times in little samples and sort of really contrived examples. So I always like to have one sort of realish app, even if the realish app is kind of silly, that I can build and maintain and work on over time. When we ship new things with NativeScript, sometimes I'll come in here and tinker and try them out and experiment with them. And so that's exactly what happened with code sharing. So this is an app that started as an Angular CLI app because I was just building it for the web. And then at some point, it was like, well, we have code sharing, so I should really try porting this over to NativeScript to make this work on iOS or Android. And so if we go back to this project here, just so you can see, what I did is I ran ngserve. So with code sharing apps, basically the web portion is still very much built on top of the Angular CLI. So really everything about this app is going to be just like any other Angular CLI app that you would build using Angular. And so I run it with ngserve, it spins it up on a local host. And this part of the app is basically like quote unquote done. At least it's, it's shipped. It's at, if you care for anybody that, I bought a domain name for this because I make questionable, I think it's checklist. Because I think like a lot of us in tech, I've owned some very questionable domains. So I own gochecklist.app. You can try this out. I'm sure you'll be thrilled by trying this, but it's already out there and it is deployed. So that part of this is sort of already done. That's not really what I want to talk about and do here today as part of the stream. What's not done is if I go and then take this app and run this on iOS. And so this is a code sharing app. So to do this, I didn't have to switch to a different project to run this on iOS. I'm doing this from exactly the same project here. And this is going to do a NativeScript build of this exact same app. And I've got, let's see. Got my iOS simulator over here. So once this deploys, we can take a look at what this looks like on iOS. Spoiler alert, it's not particularly exciting. And so if I have this up here, this is sort of the direct equivalent of what you're seeing here. So I've got this little navigation. Obviously, it doesn't look that great. And I've got a sort of kind of complete buggy sort of thing going on iOS over here. And it's going to be the same on Android. And so what I figured is we'd poke around here and just sort of take a look at how this works, sort of compare and contrast the web and mobile approaches. And again, if you have any questions, it can be about NativeScript and Angular. It can be about anything. If you're curious about the background in my room, if you have questions about Twitch, feel free to reach out and we can chat and we can talk about that a little bit. But all right, so we've got our simple app, our Pokemon app. And I'll drag over the web version of this. And let's start to look a little bit at how this thing is built. So I've got Visual Studio Code. And I've got the app folder, I've got my home folder, which are the files used to build this really simple home page. And on the home over here, so this is the web version of the thing. And you can see the homepage is really simple. On the web, it's just a sort of list of links. The links essentially route you to the different checklists that you might want to use as part of this app. And what's interesting is you'll note the TNS extension. And so TNS is short for Telerik NativeScript. And really the idea behind code sharing is there are some things you want to share as part of your app development and other things that you either need to or want to fork for the different platforms. And so some of the easy things to share is, for example, this component that drives this is shared code. And the reason is because the component that backs this doesn't really need to do anything. This is just a glorified set of links. But the example, the markup has to be different. So on the web, you need to write HTML for this component and use that to sort of determine how your app actually gets rendered. And for NativeScript, you need to use NativeScript user interface components. The same is going to be true for CSS as well. So in here, I have the CSS that I use to drive the web part of this app. So again, I'm not doing much. This isn't a highly designed or very pretty app. But if I want, obviously, this is not the world's greatest design that we have here. So what I want to do is create a web version of this CSS file for NativeScript. And I don't really have, this is where my lack of design skills come in. So what I'm going to do is just start to make this look a little bit better. And what should happen if the NativeScript CLI is going to cooperate with me is it should detect the TNS version of this, the NativeScript version of this, and apply it and restart this. Sometimes it's weird about picking up new files, or maybe I spelled something wrong. So I'm going to try restarting this to hopefully see if it picks up. The other thing too is I'll go side by side in VS Code. So let's bring up the markup and the CSS. Just wondering if I have something that's more specific with this label. So we'll see if restarting it, it'll pick up on this CSS file. Yeah, there we go. So that was weird that it didn't pick that up. I have to look into that later. So we've got this, and this is roughly how you fork your code to have like a NativeScript version of your CSS and a non-NativeScript version of it. Obviously, this is not exactly what I want. So let's see. What I might do is, why don't we probably have a color in my main app CSS or styles.css. I think this is the color I use for most of the apps. So I probably want my border color to be this. And border radius. I honestly have no idea what the units on those things are. We can do a padding. I think, yeah, and then maybe a margin as well for these things. And then I think, honestly, for this, I'd probably want these things to be, I'd almost need to get a designer to come help me and get some links that are a part of this. Why is let's see. Action bar should be styled. Let me try this and see. There we go. So I got my action bar looking decently. And I think I'm going to make this use a grid layout. And we want one row and 2 columns. And let's see, now we got to actually place them. So row 0, col 0. And try this. And we'll see if I did that right. Looks like no. Rows 1, to give this thing like a height so it takes up space. I'm screwing something up. Rows and columns. Is it something related to the columns I'm doing? Yeah. If anybody has any ideas, let me know. Not totally sure what I'm doing wrong here. Got 2 columns, 2 rows for this grid. The other thing I could do is I could make this a Flexbox layout, which actually might make a little more sense anyways. You can just see what this looks like. And then I'll have to, the only way I ever remember how to do anything Flexbox is go to the CSS Tricks article on it, because I do want these to wrap. So I think it's Flex wrap. I don't know how anybody remembers anything that has a, oh, I was assigning 1 pixel to the first row. Oh, this is got to be, I got to move this up to the container. Yeah, if this doesn't work, I'll go back to the grid layout and try that out. Yeah, I didn't even think about this. I think, let's try that. So if I go back, let's just refresh all of this. So go back to a grid layout. You're right, I gotta go row star. There we go. Yeah, and I need 2 rows. All right. Thank you. That was helpful. Who knows how long I would have been staring at that. So I have this, and we'll text align, center this. And that's at least a little bit better. I might, like I said, at some point I'll probably want to get a little more professional look for this. Boxes isn't great, but it's better than the simple list of labels that I had up here. But the thing I was mainly showing to focus is notice how, like, the idea here is I'm using NativeScript files. And if I wanted to, I could go into the web version of this and start tweaking those values here. I know that we have some people too that will use Sass and even share variables so that you don't have to, say, duplicate these hex values and such all over the place, or maybe font families. I'm not a huge fan of Sass personally, so I do not take that route. I don't mind a little bit of duplication, but it's an option that you have. But basically, I just wanted to show you more or less how it works. This is sort of the world's simplest page, so it's really quite simple. I have some other things I needed to fix on this as well. I'm curious why the action bar CSS keeps breaking, because unless I'm overriding this, I would expect that to stay. I don't know if I'm doing anything to the action bar in here. It doesn't look like it. This is another thing I need to tweak and look at. All right, so if I go in, so this page is mostly complete at this point. Maybe it's because I'm using the theme. I wonder if it wants me to do this. And then if I switched my CSS to use this, yeah, it likes that a little bit better. Although I'm surprised, it might have been that because I'm bringing in this, there was some more specific CSS rules that are happening there. All right, so at this point, I've got this app, and then if I bring up this again, so here's sort of the web equivalent. And I know I have some other to-dos that are a part of this next screen, the actual checklist app. Like, I know the images are broken. There's a couple other things that I need to do as well. So looking at the images, so the way I have this structured, so this was the home page. The home page is pretty simple. And then this next component I just have called Dex, short for Pokedex. And I again have different markup. This time things are a little bit more complex because there's a lot of stuff potentially going on here. I've got a list of things, but I've also got, for example, on the web, I have a way of changing sort order. So you might want to look at this list. Maybe you want to sort it by name. Maybe you want to share it, change it by Pokedex number. And I think probably the most common thing that people want to do is sort it by checked. So essentially the things that you already have go to the bottom of the list, and you'd be looking at the top of like the list of things that you have remaining to get. And so there's a decent amount of complexity on here. And I know when I first looked at this that the first thing I wanted to address is the images being broken. And this is a case where I already know, I haven't looked into it to see what the specific problem is, but I do know that it's something related to paths, the path to actually get the image. Because if I go to my component, which this is, again, another component that I'm sharing across the web version of this app and the mobile version of this app, which is kind of cool because there's a non-trivial amount of code in here. Like, for example, the sorting logic is all in here. For example, there's code in here to determine like the color of this bar that appears on the top, so it gets more green as you go. So it's kind of cool that this amount of code can actually be shared. It's sort of neat to use this in an iOS app, but I do have to fork my code occasionally. For example, I've got a service in here that I use to set the page title. So let's see. So for example, if I open up the utility service on the web, Angular has this service in the browser platform to actually change the title. And so I use that to say, you can see go checklist Dex. And then if I go back here, it changes to Lucky Dex, and some different things update. But on NativeScript, that sort of doesn't really exist. And on NativeScript instead, I'm just using, I'm just getting the page title and setting it on the action bar. So there is no browser page title that I have. So for this utility service, I have the NativeScript version of this is just a pass-through. And what this buys me is basically in my component code, so in the Dex here, I can call set page title and use this in a shared component. So this component can be used across both platforms. I can use it. It keeps my code relatively clean. So the code to actually get the images, so on the web, because I'm probably going to have to change both of these things up to make them work. So I have this, the sprite, and I already have a get image path method, which I don't know if I'm using on my mobile app quite yet either. So in here, I'm not using a method, so I'm probably going to have to switch to do that. And in fact, let me just do that. This is definitely not going to just work. In fact, I might get the app to crash, but we'll see what happens. So I'll say I want to get the image path, and I need to pass in a item just because that's the name of my variable. And so the images did not fix, but my app did not break. So that is always nice. One thing I want to do actually is it's kind of annoying that every time I make a change here, it goes back to the start. So I'm just going to finagle my routing, which I think I have app routes. And I'm just going to say to start. This doesn't matter what this is. I think if I finagle this to start on the main page, and then I think I have to hack this a little bit. And then comment this out. And then I should be able to just start on this checklist directly without having to sort of do that finagling. I think because I saved a bunch of things. Did I freak the NativeScript CLI out here? Oh, I think it was just all those little changes where it was still broken. So now my homepage is this, just to make things a little bit easier to test. And I've got my get image path variable where I have a little bit of logic because there's a couple different things like certain Pokemon have different sprites for male and female, so I have some logic in for this. But the thing is, this method here is actually not going to totally work for both because the image paths are going to be different between the web and iOS. So on the web, if I bring back over, I've got my browser here, the path to my image is, if I just inspect one of these things at random, is just going to be like /app/images, the path, and .png. And in NativeScript, I might have to bring up the documentation to get it exactly, but essentially it's going to be something like, let's see, I have get image path. What is this even doing down here? Oh, the /app. So it's something like tilde images. You can see if something like this just fixes it right away. Might have to look this up. NativeScript image paths, because the images are packaged within the app folder itself. So we'll see how good the NativeScript documentation is on the fly. Yeah, I thought that would work. ~/ images, and then the code should be the same. Use like my favorite debugging technique ever. Just log out whatever path that we're getting and see if it is what we expect it to be. And so, did I not hit my console log for getting the image path? Am I not calling it? I should be calling it when I get in here. I wonder if I'm falling out on any of these. I might spin up the debugger here in a second so we can actually step through this and see what the problem might be. Or if I'm just completely failing at something, getting the image path. Hello, Ed. See the Blazer glove as well. Ed, I'm struggling though. I need to debug live on air here, and I can't get my image paths right. And people are judging my console logging debugging because I'm very much a professional. But see, the whole thing with Twitch, right, is it's supposed to feel a little bit live. You're not supposed to have everything totally figured out, and so I'm doing this on purpose so everybody can experience me failing in real time. And I'm not going into this get image path method at all, which is really weird. So I don't know why I'm not going in here, because I should have this. So if I make this like /images, and then it wouldn't be icons, it would be like sprites /0.png. Let's just see if we can hard code something and get something to show up. So that's not working either. Now I start to question whether I'm looking at something completely irrelevant. Starts to like, yeah, so, okay. I finally got, yeah, exactly. Console.log is life. If I get a tattoo, that would totally be the tattoo I get. So my sanity is intact enough to know that I can apply a border. You're getting to see all my live NativeScript hacks here. Putting a border around something is a good way to just sanity check that things you're actually seeing something. But my way of getting this sprite is totally broken, because I wonder, because this is a code sharing app, something tells me I might need the app in here. And actually, that is the correct image. So if I do this, there we go. All right, I have Bulbasaur here. I should be taking notes during this of like different things to address with the NativeScript documentation, because the trick here, and I just randomly remembered this, is that when you're doing, so normally with NativeScript, this is the path you need to get at your images, but the structure of your app when you're doing code sharing is just a little bit different. And so you have this app folder that's in place here that lives in source. So normally app is a top level folder in your NativeScript app. Because of the way that code sharing sort of works in terms of processing your apps, you have this source folder and app within it. And so your paths end up being a little bit different. And so this is the path that essentially I need to have. And so that is now working. So I can get rid of some of this debugging hackery I have going on. And so I'm getting rid of the border. And so we should see Bulbasaur now in every single cell of this image. And so we do. And that is good. Our names are still coming through correctly. So this is a step in the right direction. The next thing to figure out, and actually I think I might know what this is is why I wasn't going into this method. And actually, I think it's because, so I've got getImagePath here, and I was calling it, if I go back, but I think I know what I was doing wrong. So I had my getImagePath, yeah, but I wasn't binding to it. So of course I wasn't going into it because Angular needs me to put these magical brackets around it for actually to use. Okay, so now I have all these these very professional debugging statements that we have in here coming through, which is good. This is progress. And so if I go back here, I know I don't need these things. And actually, now I know that the problem is probably that I have to go app images and put it in, and there we go. So we have images. I'm glad that finally worked. The cool thing about NativeScript, so one reason to sort of port your apps over, and showing this on the simulator through the stream is probably not the greatest way of illustrating this, but especially for list-based apps, it can make a big difference in terms of just the user experience of building just a native built-in list. It really just feels nice on iOS and Android. So UI table view, Android.widget. I can't remember the list view control on Android, but even minor things like that, even if the functionality is exactly the same, it can be really cool to bring that functionality over to mobile. And so this feels really nice. But we still have a problem, and the problem is if I go over here and say I run ngserve, and actually, I'll show you in a minute, we can actually run these things at the same time, so we can check whether we broke things in one platform versus the other. And so we'll give this a second to start up, and when it does, give me a second to do some window dragging here. So let's kill a few of these things. So we don't need a lot of this. And if I go to Globes 4200, you'll see that, so the routing change that I made to default to the checklist app, it's kind of cool. I made that change and it automatically applied on the web. But I did break these images here. So I fixed the images on one platform and I killed them over here on the web. And so this gives me a few different options of how I want to fix this. And actually, let me, real quick, because I said I was going to do this. You can open multiple terminal windows or command prompts on Windows and essentially queue this thing up to run on multiple platforms. You can actually run TNS run without any qualifiers if you wanted to. Like, I could, if I wanted to, also bring this up on, say, an Android emulator. I could get an iPad going. We could test it on there too. We could have a bunch of things going on. You could technically set this up with an entire suite of devices. But for our purposes, I can only logically show so many windows at the same time. We're just going to stick with the web and iOS. And if I'm fancy, I might be able to get this up and running side by side, or at least good enough, so that we can see if we actually successfully fix it in both places. And I think I have this title, so let's see if I did this right. So in theory, when I change this, it should detect that change for both the web, you see it down here, and for iOS, which is pretty cool. I like doing that just for fun, just because it sort of blows my mind a little bit that you can do it. But obviously that's not helping us at the moment. At the moment, we need these images to work. And all right, so what do we do? So we have this method here, and this is really what's going to, actually, I don't think I can get rid of this sort of debugging here, because there's a few different options of where we can put the code to actually switch the image path. Obviously, I'll need some sort of an if check at some point. And there are ways that you can detect, for example, if you're running on, say, NativeScript, or you're working on the web. But I prefer to use these sort of helper or utility files. So I've already got one for Dex helper for some various things. And for example, some of this is like dialog display. So on the web, like if I show a dialog, I need to mess with some CSS. And on NativeScript, there's like no concept of this. So a lot of the NativeScript things here are sort of pass-throughs. And I think what I'm going to do is leverage this helper to sort of solve our problem here as well. Because the difference, I think, so we've got this, let's go here. I think I can fix the web by, I think it's just slash images. Let's see if this fixes the web and breaks. Now I got to remember what I had before. So let's see. How good are you, Visual Studio Code? So what I had before, slash app slash images is what I had for the web. Go VS Code, that's actually pretty slick that I can do that. So now if I go slash app slash images, so yeah, so now I broke the app and I fixed the web. And so what I think I want to do, like I said, there's different ways you could do this, is I want a helper method that's something like get, so like, I don't know what a good name for this would be. Like, I need some custom Pokemon alerts and emoji for your stream. I need to get on this. This is the first time I'm doing this, so I need to work up on upping my professionalism. So actually, fun story though. I mentioned earlier, if you were here a while ago, that this is an app. This checklist app was an app that was on Android. I deployed it, and it got like it crossed over 50,000 installs within like a couple of months. Which, you know, for me, I never do. The apps I've shipped before usually get like dozens of downloads and installs. So it was actually kind of cool to see. But I think hitting that 50,000 milestone triggered some sort of Google review. And so what they did is I got an email that basically said I was using copyrighted images, which I probably am, to be fair. And so the app just suddenly went down. And as such, I stopped for a while, I stopped sort of caring about making this app work on iOS or Android because like it was sort of demoralizing, right? I didn't really care. But at some point I started doing some research. I'm like, well, there's lots of like little Pokemon helper apps out there. What are they doing differently? And the sort of common convention is that you don't use like actual images of the Pokemon, but what you seem to be able to get away with, and sorry for my excessive scrolling here, but I'm trying to find it, is you essentially take, I don't want this. Essentially, you take like blackened out images because these are not copyrighted. And it takes away a little bit from the fun of the app because it's cool to see the actual images of things. But those are technically copyrighted images. The Pokemon Company apparently enforces those pretty harshly. And so if I am going to make an attempt to bring this back to the stores, which I might do, it would be with these images. And actually, so a little backstory of this is I was pretty proud of myself because I'm usually not good at this stuff. Actually, it's outside of source somewhere here. I wrote a little script using some code I found on the internet that takes in the main sprites that I use, which are provided by the Pokemon API. So thanks to the people behind that for creating those. And it uses this utility I found to actually just convert them to have that black sprite so that they have the shadow background. So actually, I might try to throw that in right here. But that's sort of the background of this. If you look for this app out on the iOS App Store or Google Play, it's not there. And actually, so I did Google Play first just because Google Play is really trivial to submit to. And then after that, I submitted it to the iOS App Store, and they actually denied my app for basically the same reason. And so I'm not sure if I'm going to try to get this, if this is just going to live as a demo app, or if I'm actually going to take the effort to try to push this back out to the stores. But some of these fixes, bringing some of this functionality is something I'm trying to do. Yeah, Yeah, exactly. Images being used in parody. I I have mixed feelings about this sort of issue in general. I mean, the I understand having copyrighted material, but it's sort of questionable because this is just like a little trivial utility. I'm not trying to make any money off of it, and it's a way showing that I really like the the thing I'm using. Like you almost think that they would provide a set of images that you could use for free and sort of fan and custom things, just because it seems like it would help their ecosystem. But in any case, that's a broader discussion than what we're having right now. For the moment, all I want to do is fix these image paths so that we can actually see images on iOS and on the web. And I think naming things is hard, but let's image path prefix. And so I'm just going to say this as a pass through for here and here. And then on here, then, all right. So this is back my main component that's actually controlling both of these. And so I'm going to say get helper dot get image path prefix plus all of this. And so at the moment, this will do nothing. So all I'm hoping to see is that this refreshes and I don't see any horrible crashes here. And I don't, although I broke both of these now, which is quite fun. And so I think all of this would technically go away because all of this is something I would want to build into the method now. And so I'll do this. It's still going to break. But at this point, I now should have the setup where my common code here, we should be done with this file because this should be all set. So what I can do now is say, all right, so for the web, because I'm in the web version of this, I want /app/images. And there we go. So I see the images that appear here. And then for NativeScript, I can return, let's see if I remember, tilde app images. And if that works, there we go. So I now have my images appearing in both places. And this is the sort of thing that in a realistic code sharing app, you're going to have to do occasionally, just because even though a lot of the code is still the same, for example, this component, like I said, there's a lot of logic in here. There's also a lot of logic. There's a service that I'm using that's actually doing hitting. There's a backend behind this. There's a bunch of code to a lot of this is sorting logic and how these things are actually saved. So I'm saving these using local storage on the web, and basically, what am I using on NativeScript? I'm using the file system on NativeScript to actually store these. So a lot of this code gets to be saved, or shared. But I think what you'll find is that a lot of these little tweaks, you'll have to fork your code a little bit. But hopefully, as in this case, hopefully it's not all that complex to do that sort of thing. So we have images working, and actually, what I might do, I haven't tried the shadow ones as well, because I think the path is a little bit different. Because what I did is in my images, I have either, so I'm going to have to bring this in. So how do I want to do this? Because I could move all of this logic in. I could pass the mode into my helper. This becomes very much a software developer-y type thing that I might tackle some other time. So I guess at this point, this stream, I wanted to keep fairly short to sort of try things out. Does anybody, any questions about what I'm doing? Are people following along? Do you find this interesting? Any questions about just code sharing in general or what I happen to be doing? If so, drop it in the chat. I will mention that this app is up on GitHub. So if you want to explore with this, It's on my GitHub repo. So TJ Van Tol on GitHub. The application is called Go Checklist. So you can check this out. You can download it. You can try it out. You can run it. I need to update the README. NativeScript, you don't need -- bundle anymore. So I can update that and change that up. We can kill that. But if you do find this interesting, there's a bunch of other stuff I want to do to this app. Like I'm about a version behind on NativeScript. So we could cover things like upgrading the version of the NativeScript app being used. There's some other styling changes I need to make as part of this to develop it. And I could even cover, for example, App Store deployment. So we could talk about how you get an app out to the iOS App Store and Google Play. We can walk through that. That's a fun process. So I can share some of the pain with you. But yeah, nothing else. Upgrade to 6. Actually, this is, so a couple of the upgrades I can do. Yeah, thanks, Ed. This is on version 6, and NativeScript 6.1 is out. And the reason I would do that upgrade is there's a couple interesting things. So, for example, in here, I've got a couple different checks I'm using for styling purposes for iOS versus Android. Like I've got a is Android flag here. And what's cool is that in 6.1, there's actually a global class name that's available that I think is like TNS iOS and TNS Android. So I'd get to take that code out, which would clean things up just a little bit. The other thing I've been meaning to do in terms of upgrades is there's a new NativeScript core theme. And so if I go to the NativeScript blog, there's it's basically a 2.0 version of the theme that's available. And it changes up some things, like there's a dark mode. So I could do, for example, I could detect the user's like OS level setting and see if they have, because dark mode is now a built-in option on iOS. What's the latest iOS? iOS 13. Somebody could correct me if I'm saying this wrong. iOS 13. I think Android Q has it. So you could do things like, let's detect the user's OS level dark mode setting. And if it's set, then use the NativeScript core theme. And let's see, I've got like, you can sort of get a sense of how this works. You can like toggle dark mode on or off, or you could offer it as like a user setting, dark mode. So that's something that I could experiment with. Even I think just showing off the new theme and trying to upgrade this thing and just seeing what happens could be a lot of fun. Material design, another comment. Yeah, absolutely. There's actually, as part of the new theme, there's a way that you can do some material designy things. And we have some new material design components coming up. So that could be a lot of fun. It could fit in with this list app as well. So thank you for the ideas. If you found this interesting, stay tuned to my Twitch channel. If this ends up being successful, if people like watching it, these are some of the other topics I'll probably cover. Maybe using this app, maybe we'll toy with some other demos. But for now, I think I'm going to take off. So thanks again for everybody that showed up, and I'll see you around.